Hello, my friends, hello, and welcome once again to Stately Vaughan Manor, where Roger and I have returned because it's time for my weekend reading report. My weekend reading report! That fantastic program where I talk about all the stuff that I read during the previous week. And this past week was crap. What a terrible week this was, Roger. It was pretty much the worst week of, well, I don't know if it was, it might be the worst, it might have been the worst week of the year. It was bad. But I'm not going to get into all the badness because that is behind us. It is back there. It's behind us. We're only going to be talking about the stuff that I read. And that was interesting. We are in the middle of Sumerian September. What is the date? I don't even know what day it is. It's the 8th. We're not quite in the middle of Sumerian September, but we're getting towards the middle. Sumerian September. The fantastic reading event, if I do say so myself, the fantastic reading event where we read Conan. We celebrate Robert E. Howard and his greatest fictional creation, Conan. And last year Roger and I read all of the original stories written by Robert E. Howard of Conan. I'd read them before, of course, but any excuse to read Conan. So I read all of Robert E. Howard's original Conan last year. And this year I'm returning to the scandalous 12-volume series that was edited by L. Sprague de Camp, which reintroduced Conan to the wider reading public. He brought Conan, L. Sprague de Camp did, to paperback, and in the process put a bunch of his stories in and mixed them all up with Robert E. Howard's original stories. And L. Sprague de Camp and Lynn Carter teamed up on some stories. It was a mess. But I decided to reread this series, which I have not read since probably I was a teenager. Probably, it's been a while. I decided to reread these books and give them my strict critical appraisal. Yes, so we'll go to the 500 book challenge. The challenge where I have to read 500 books I already own before I'll buy any new ones. Book 176 was a book I talked a little bit about last week, Conan the Freebooter. I had started this book and was talking about it last week, Conan the Freebooter. Look at that fantastic cover by Boris Vallejo. This could be my favorite Boris cover of the Conan series. It's just so very, very Conan. It's awesome. And the book is pretty good. It's got its issues. So it starts with the story Hawks Over Shem, which is an historical story written by Robert E. Howard that was transformed by L. Sprague de Camp. Names were changed. A hero was turned into a Sumerian barbarian, and we have a Conan story. So Hawks Over Egypt, which is a good story written by Robert E. Howard, was turned into a Conan story, which frankly wasn't as good as Hawks Over Egypt. But we have it here, a very bizarre Conan story. Black Colossus is in here, which is one of the greatest Conan stories written by Robert E. Howard. Black Colossus is fantastic. So that was great. Then we had Shadows in the Moonlight. Another really good Conan story, Shadows in the Moonlight by Robert E. Howard is in here. And then we had The Road of Eagles, which is another historical story by Robert E. Howard that had nothing to do with Conan, that L. Sprague de Camp decided to turn into a Conan story. So he did that. And it wasn't bad. It wasn't a bad, good story transformed into a Conan story. It's just weird. It just feels weird, particularly if you have read the original versions of these stories. And then this book ends up with A Witch Shall Be Born, which is a pretty good Conan story. It's not everybody's favorite. It's probably the Conan story that has the least Conan in it. It features a lot of other characters. But when Conan is in the story, it's magnificent. And this is, of course, the famous story where Conan was crucified and was taken down from his cross. And, He was fine. He was fine after that. He just, he needed like a few days to recover. And then, he's Conan. He's really tough, this guy. So Conan the Freebooter, it was pretty good. It was pretty good, mostly because there's Robert E. Howard Conan stories in here. And then we have Conan the Wanderer. Conan the Wanderer. Another Boris cover. This is the Boris cover for The Devil in Iron. That big guy is the Devil in Iron, although he doesn't look like he's made of iron. That's okay. It's Conan the Wanderer by L. Sprague. By Robert E. Howard's in here too. Robert E. Howard, L. Sprague Camp, and Lynn Carter. They're all in this book. Conan the Wanderer. So this was, pretty good because it had Robert E. Howard stories in it. It had an interesting story called Black Tears by L. Sprague Camp and Lynn Carter. So that's a straight pastiche story that L. Sprague Camp and Lynn Carter wrote together. Robert E. Howard had nothing to do with this one. And I was surprised at the beginning of Black Tears because it started off really strong. And for the first several pages, I'm thinking, wow, this is actually a really good story. And then it turned not so good. It became okay. And and the prose went really, really strange. And so it feels like maybe L. Sprague Camp wrote the first part of this story, and then Lynn Carter came in and just Lynn Cartered the place up, and with his just ridiculous purple prose. And yeah, it wasn't bad. It's not a bad story. And the supernatural menace in this story is actually pretty good. Conan never feels like Conan in this story. He doesn't feel like Conan. He feels like a Lynn Carter knockoff of Conan. That's what it feels like. But as a story, it's not bad. But man, you can just see such a difference in quality when you put those pastiche stories with Robert E. Howard stories. It's just, man, it's really obvious with something like Black Tears. Then we have Shadows in Zamboula by Robert E. Howard, which is one of my least favorite Conan stories. It's one of my least favorite. It has some good moments in it. There's some good things in that story, and there's some things that are not so great. So, one of Robert E. Howard's not so great Conan stories, in my opinion. Still a hell of a lot better than Black Tears, though. Oh my goodness. Then we've got The Devil in Iron, which is definitely one of Robert E. Howard's greatest Conan stories. The Devil in Iron is just a fantastic story. It's just incredible. So The Devil in Iron is in this. I love that story. I love it. I love it. It's fantastic. And then we get a very weird thing at the end of this, which is the flame knife. The flame knife, which is a story that originally was not a Conan story. It was a Robert E. Howard story called Three-Bladed Doom. It was Three-Bladed Doom, if I'm remembering correctly. And L. Sprague Camp took that story, which was an Alborac story. Francis Xavier Gordon, otherwise known as Alborac, was an adventurer in the Middle East, an American adventurer in the Middle East who had all kinds of fantastic adventures. And he's one of Robert E. Howard's greatest characters, in my opinion. But they took that character and turned that character into Conan and made this a Conan story called The Flame Knife, which is really long because it was a pretty long Alborac story. And it's just weird to read an Alborac story that's been turned into Conan. Because if you know the original story, you could see all of the things that L. Sprague Camp changed. And if you didn't know what it was, it would read like a pretty good Conan story. The supernatural element, of course, which is just tacked on because it didn't originally have a supernatural element, Elborak, I mean, those stories are not supernatural. They're just adventure stories. And so the supernatural element that L. Sprague de Camp injects into the story just seems really artificial and just added on. It usually feels like that in these stories, which are not Conan stories that he turns into Conan stories. And you really feel that in this one. The original version was better. I would recommend that you get the Del Rey edition of Elborak and Other Desert Adventures and read that. It's just weird. It's almost a desecration. It just seems like the wrong thing to do. But you know, L. Sprague de Camp wanted to pad this series out, and this is one of the ways he did it. So yeah, there's that. And where's the book I'm reading now? I think I left it in the other room. Hold on. Okay, I'm back. So that was book 177 and 178. I'm reading, well, actually I finished another book. So this would be 180. This would be 180. This is Conan the Adventurer. And this is interesting because in the series, this is book 5 out of the 12. But this is the first paperback edition, and it says volume 1 there. And that's because this is actually right here in my hand is the first Conan paperback that came out in this series ever. And Conan had appeared before in paperback, I believe, in an Ace double. I think The Hour of the Dragon was renamed Conan the Conqueror, and then that showed up as one half of an Ace double. But as far as the actual Conan series and the books that actually reintroduced Conan to the public, this is the first one. And it says here in this little box here, readers and critics have long considered the tales of Conan to be among the greatest fantasy adventure epics of all time, and Robert E. Howard is a writer deserving a reputation comparable to that of Edgar Rice Burroughs. I would agree. Most of these stories appeared in the early 1930s and have long been unavailable to the general public because of legal complications ensuing after Howard's tragic death. Now, by special arrangement with the Howard estate, Lancer Books is proud to announce the publication of the complete series in 8 books. This, the first volume to appear, includes one story never before published anywhere. So, it was originally, this is the first book that showed up. It was originally supposed to be 8 books, but L. Sprague de Camp padded it out to 12 because this Conan became L. Sprague de Camp's, moneymaker. This is where he earned his cash, was Robert E. Howard's Conan. And so, yeah, he padded this series out and then just kept on going after that. So it was originally supposed to be an 8-book series before L. Sprague de Camp and Lynn Carter added all the other extra stuff. And he writes his introduction here. And here he mentions the Drums of Tumbalku. One of the stories in this volume, Drums of Tumbalku, was recently discovered by Glenn Lord, the literary agent for the Howard estate, in the form of an outline and a rough draft of the first half. I have finished the story in accordance with the outline. The other 3 stories, except for a few very small editorial changes, are in the form in which they first appeared in Weird Tales, early 1930s. Lancer Books will publish the entire Conan saga in chronological order. When this project is completed, Conan the Adventurer will be the fourth of 8 volumes. So this is actually volume 5, but it was originally supposed to be volume 4. before L. Spragg Camp and Lynn Carter decided to stuff all of their Conan stories into this series. Conan the cash cow. You gotta do what you gotta do. Right, L. Spragg Camp? What an ass. Anyway, so this book is, kind of important just because it is the first Conan paperback. And in this volume, we have the stories. It starts off with The People of the Black Circle, which is fantastic. I'm reading that now. Interesting. The People of the Black Circle was the first Conan story, I suppose, that many people read because they saw this magnificent Frazetta cover and had to get this book. And for many people, The People of the Black Circle was the very first Conan story that they had read because it's the first one in this volume. And it's an excellent story, I have to say that. Then it's followed by The Slithering Shadow, which is, kind of middle of the road for Conan stories go, although I've always liked it. I like that story a lot. And then we've got Drums of Tumbalku, which is, a story that Robert E. Howard gave up on, that L. Spragg Camp finished. And then we have The Pool of the Black One, which is a pretty darn good Conan story, I think. So this is an excellent volume just from the contents. And I'm reading this now. And it should be really interesting. I can't remember how Drums of Tumbalku was. It's been too long since I've read it with all the L. Spragg Camp finishing touches, all his additions to that story. So we'll see. I mean, so far in this series, I'm on book 5 now, and my opinion has not changed about this set of books. My goodness, they really should have just published Robert E. Howard's stories as they were written in a series of, 6, maybe 7 paperback books. It probably would have been 6 or 7 books of this size, and then just added to it if they felt like they really, really had to, which obviously they did feel that. But mixing it all up, it's just, man, I think I've never liked this series because of that, and I like it probably even less now just because of that. Because the stories that and the additions that are in here, the quality is just, well, you know what I think about it. So there's that. What else did I read this week? Well, book 179, which I just finished this morning, is this. It's the Fantastic Four, The Mystery of the Black Panther. I finally finished this. It's been a busy week. But I'm reading every issue of the Fantastic Four from the first run of the Fantastic Four, which lasted from the early 1960s into the mid-1990s. And I have read 67 issues of the Fantastic Four and 5 annuals by this point. And so this was fantastic. I mean, Black Panther, the Inhumans, Doctor Doom, the Silver Surfer. We're right in the middle, right in the midst of Jack Kirby and Stan Lee's magnificent run. And it's just great. These were great stories. So this is the best batch of issues so far. Can it possibly get any better? Maybe, because this is the one I'm going to be starting next. This is The Name is Doom. So more Doctor Doom, more Stan Lee and Jack Kirby goodness. This is volume 5 in the Epic Collection line. This has issues from 1967 up to 1969. So we're rushing to the end of the 1960s with the Fantastic Four. And man, I've had a good time reading the Fantastic Four. My favorite Marvel comic, so of course I love it. And it is the greatest comic book magazine of all time. It says so right on the cover of every single issue. And so, yeah, having a great time with Fantastic Four. It continues to be magnificent. Looking forward to starting this. And there you go. I guess that's everything. Next week, more Conan. More Conan. And I think the next book after this one is a novel by L. Sprague de Camp and Lynn Carter. And I do not look forward to that. Grammaticus says it's good. Grammaticus on his channel says that book is good. I don't remember it being particularly good. And we'll see. I will let you know next week how crappy that book is. Okay, guys, I will catch you next time.